They thought silence meant safety, but one woman heard a lie inside it. When Catherine accidentally discovers a document capable of changing a UN vote, she faces a choice: to remain a shadow of the system or become the voice that will destroy it from within. This is a story about how truth can cost you silence, and about a woman who stopped translating and started speaking.
Silence. Not dead, resonant, like inside a giant metal box where the air trembles from 1,000 unseen motions. The hum of fans, the clicking of keyboards, the steady flow of voices in headphones. It all merged into a strange kind of music, the sound of power itself. At the center of this humming hive sat Catherine. 27, blonde hair tied in a messy ponytail, eyes fixed on an endless wall of text. She translated, only translated, or so she liked to believe. Over the last 3 years, she had learned to look at words without seeing their meaning. It was the only way to stay sane, to stop hearing what others said when your job was to turn secrets into language. She realized she'd been reading the same line for the 5th time. Collect intelligence on UN delegates to influence voting behavior. Simple words, yet something about them was cold. The word influence cut like a blade. Catherine removed her headphones, and the office noise faded as if someone had stuffed the world with cotton. Around her, people kept working, unaware that someone had just pulled the plug from their illusion of calm. She knew she wasn't supposed to think. Thinking here was dangerous. Here, you only translated. The day stretched like gauze, thin, sticky, endless. Catherine stepped outside, breathing in the chill air. Drizzle, umbrellas, frozen streetlights. Her walk home was short, yet tonight it felt eternal. Each raindrop struck her nerves like a metronome. At home, everything was as usual: the kettle, the old cat, the Prime Minister on TV, speaking confidently about decisive action for peace. She watched, feeling something twist inside. Not fear, something deeper. Disgust. Disgust at what was happening, and at her own silence. The email was still open on her laptop. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. She reread the line, again, and realized if anyone outside ever saw this, they'd know a war had already begun, not on battlefields, but in inboxes, marked classified. She closed the laptop, but the words wouldn't disappear. Yusuf came into the kitchen, tall, gentle, always smiling. He stirred curry rice, half listening to the news. "They'll start a war anyway," he said quietly. "It's already decided." Catherine stared at the rising steam. "What if someone could stop them?" she asked softly. "Then that someone would disappear," he said, with a smile, not realizing it wasn't just a figure of speech anymore. The next day was routine. Jokes about coffee, complaints about keyboards. But the air felt heavier, as if the system itself sensed a fracture. At the briefing, the supervisor spoke about stability and responsibility to allies. Those words sounded like an order not to think. Catherine felt the hum inside her chest, not fear, but defiance. "We must ensure the correct vote,
by any means necessary. No one doubted. To doubt was to expose yourself. That night, she stayed late. The screen reflected a face that looked 10 years older. Her hands moved automatically. Copy, paste, save. The top-secret files slid onto a flash drive. Time froze, only the hum of fans and her heartbeat. When it was done, she held the small metal rectangle in her hand. It was warm, alive. Inside, it pulsed not just data, but destiny. Night. A parking garage under a shopping mall. Yellow lamps, wet asphalt. Catherine weighted the flash drive between her fingers. A gray car appeared. A man in a coat and glasses stepped out. A journalist. He introduced himself, but didn't ask her name.
"Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure I can't live a lie anymore," she replied. He held out his hand. The drive passed from hers to his, a small click, like a gun being unlatched. She watched as he drove off, the taillights fading into the rain. For a long time she didn't move. The wind smelled of gasoline and rain, and for the first time in months she could breathe. A week later, the world exploded. Not with bombs, but with headlines. NSA memo leaked. UN vote manipulation exposed. Possible whistleblower within British intelligence. She sat in the dark, the TV flickering with faces of politicians and journalists. Their words sounded like a verdict for the system and for her. The phone rang. She didn't answer. They came 2 days later. No shouting, no handcuffs, just polite voices. "Please come with us for a few clarifications." In an office smelling of paper and coffee, a man with a granite face spoke evenly. "Do you understand, Miss Gunn, that this is treason? Who betrayed first, me or the ones who lied to all of us?" she asked. He didn't answer, just closed the file. A year passed. The rain returned, steady and familiar. Catherine lived in a small flat in another city. On the wall hung a faded clipping. War declared a mistake. Source of leak unknown. She brewed tea, listening to the radio. New laws, new wars, new leaks. Nothing had changed, except one thing. Now she knew that silence saves no one. She looked out the window and smiled for the first time in months. The sky was gray, but somewhere behind it, light was breaking through. "I never meant to be a hero. I just couldn't be the wall that hears the scream."
A month had passed. The newspapers had moved on, talk shows had found new culprits, and the world had once again sunk into its familiar hum. But within that hum, a whisper remained, quiet, persistent, as if someone still remembered. The journalist, the one who had taken the flash drive, now lived under a new name. He no longer liked mirrors. They showed not only his face, but also his fear. Every night he heard a phone ring, a single short tone. No voice, no words. And he knew it was a warning, not a question. One morning he woke and realized someone had been in his apartment. Nothing was stolen. On the contrary, things had been carefully moved. A cup shifted. A photograph turned face down. A sign that he was being watched, but not yet touched. Not yet. He packed to leave, but instead of running, he began to write. Not an article, not an exposé, a novel. About a woman who knew too much. He never used her name, but every line was a confession. Meanwhile, Catherine had found work at a humanitarian organization, a small office where no one asked too many questions. She helped refugees, and in their stories she heard echoes of her own: fear, helplessness, the loss of home. Sometimes, in the evenings, she turned on the TV with the sound off. She watched the lips of politicians move, and it seemed she understood them better than any translator could. Tell people just enough so they feel they know everything, but understand nothing. One day, she received a letter with no return address. Inside, a single page of a manuscript. She stood at the edge, but stepped not down, inward. No signature, no date. She smiled, and for the first time in a long while felt she wasn't alone. A few weeks later, she was summoned to the police station, not as a suspect, as a witness assisting the investigation. In a room that smelled of metal and coffee sat a young investigator, too polite, too insistent. "We're investigating the activities of certain NGOs connected to data leaks. You used to work in government structures, didn't you?" "Long ago," she replied calmly, "and I wouldn't go back there, even if the world turned upside down." He nodded, pretending to take notes, but his pen never touched the paper. She realized he was simply observing her, reading her face, the way a doctor studies a patient before giving a diagnosis. "Thank you, Miss Gunn. If you remember anything, call us." She left, feeling his eyes on her back. She knew she was back on the list. That evening, the rain poured down like a curtain. She walked fast, but someone was following her. A shadow reflected in the shop windows, never closer, never farther. Catherine turned into an alley and stopped. "You can come out," she said quietly. "I'm done hiding." Out of the darkness stepped the journalist. His gaze was tired, eyes full of unease. "I'm not following you," he said. "I'm following the ones who are following you." "So there are two of us who still remember." He nodded. "But it's not over. New documents have surfaced. It's happening again, only under a different flag." "Another leak?" she asked. "No," he said. "Another choice for you." The days grew longer, but the light colder. Catherine stood once more before the same crossroads she had faced a year ago. A flash drive, documents, risk. Only now the stakes were higher. Not vote manipulation, but a covert operation disguised as humanitarian aid. She knew if she exposed this, there would be no silence left for her. But silence meant consent. All night, she couldn't sleep. On the table, photographs of children from camps, reports, letters from volunteers, a map marked with red lines. It all formed a grim symphony. Every note a lie. She picked up the phone and dialed the journalist. "I have proof," she said. Then we meet, he replied. But not here, not in this country. The following day is turned into a chain of coded messages, brief encounters, journeys, train stations, airports, cafes without Wi-Fi. She felt herself drawn once again into the very game she had sworn to leave behind. Once, at the border, her documents were checked for too long. The officer looked at her too intently, then waved her through, though recognition flickered in his eyes. She understood. Time was running out. The final meeting took place in an old hotel on the outskirts of Berlin. A gray room, dusty curtains, the smell of coffee and damp walls. On the table, a laptop, a flash drive, a glass of water. The journalist looked pale and exhausted. "We'll upload it," he said. "Let the world decide." "The world doesn't decide," she replied. "The world just watches." He wanted to argue, but didn't have time. Footsteps echoed outside. She went to the window. A black car stood by the entrance. No plates. "Go," she said. "You still have a chance." "And you?" he asked. "I've already made my choice." He hesitated, then grabbed the flash drive and disappeared through the back door. The door shut, and the world fell quiet again. 24 hours later, the internet erupted. Documents, videos, leaked recordings. The world was talking once more about the whistleblower. Politicians denied. Newspapers screamed. But no one ever named the source. Not ever. A month later, the journalist received a letter. Inside, a photograph. The sea, stones, and a few words on the back. Freedom is not silence. It's choosing who hears your voice.
Years passed. The world changed, and yet it didn't. New wars, new scandals, new heroes ready to tell the truth. And somewhere, in a small house by the sea, lived a woman who no longer feared silence. She grew herbs, wrote notes, and taught children to translate, not words, but meanings. Sometimes, at night, she turned on an old radio. The static hummed like the distant echo of that office where it all began, and she thought she could still hear the whisper. Collect intelligence on UN delegates to influence voting behavior? She closed her eyes and answered softly, "I'm not a translator anymore. I'm a witness."
If this story spoke to you, stay with us. Here we tell the stories of those who refuse to stay silent. Subscribe, share, and keep listening, because every voice deserves to be heard.